Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Pyathlon. In today's video, we'll be talking about the Stellar network and its cryptocurrency, the Stellar Lumens. Now, what is Stellar? If you go to stellar.org, which is its official webpage, you'll see Stellar is an open network for storing and moving money. And that's essentially what it is. It's a network that allows you to transfer, send, and receive payments. Now, Stellar was originally built to be a digital representation of any currency, but it also has its own cryptocurrency that runs natively to the network called the Stellar Lumens. And the great thing about this network is you can send and receive money, and the fees are extremely low. It's pennies on the dollar for each transaction, which is much cheaper than performing transactions on other blockchains and other cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin or Ethereum. Something that's really interesting about the Stellar network and Stellar Lumens is it's not necessarily meant to replace the traditional banking and financial system. Rather, it's meant to complement it and run adjacent to it. One advantage I think Stellar has over a lot of other cryptocurrency or blockchain networks is that with those networks you may be only able to send one kind of cryptocurrency or one kind of asset, but with Stellar you can trade any kind of money in a transparent and efficient way. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to see exactly how they mean. This paragraph here, what it's essentially saying is that you can have a digital representation of a currency and you can trade that digital representation of a currency, and that digital token will have essentially a one-to-one relationship between whatever the digital asset is and the actual asset. So you can have a one-to-one relationship between a dollar token and the actual US dollar, and you can trade that dollar token via the Stellar network, and then it can be converted to a US dollar. And that's the beautiful thing about the Stellar network. You're not limited to only trading Stellar Lumens. You can create digital representations of other currencies and then trade that digital representation of the currency over the Stellar network. As you may be aware, every blockchain and every cryptocurrency has to have some way to validate transactions before they're added to the immutable blockchain or the immutable distributed ledger. And with Bitcoin, it uses a proof of work method. And if you look at something like Ethereum 2.0, that uses a proof of stake method. But Stellar actually does something different. It uses what's called the SCP, the Stellar Consensus Protocol. And now we're just going to spend a quick minute to talk about that. We're not going to go very in depth about it. I'm just going to give you a high level overview of it. Now let's talk about the Stellar Consensus Protocol. And I made a little graphic here so I can better explain this protocol. I know my graphic design skills aren't very good. Don't beat me up too bad in the comment section. But anyway, so this SCP, the Stellar Consensus Protocol, is based off a type of consensus protocol called the Federated Byzantine Agreement. If you're not familiar with the Byzantine general problem, in a nutshell, it just wants to answer the question, if some people are bad actors, how can you make sure those bad actors don't end up destroying the entire network? I'm definitely paraphrasing there, but if you Google the Byzantine general problem, you'll be able to get a much more better and in-depth explanation of it. But let's talk about some of the features of the SCP consensus mechanism first. First, it has decentralized control, so anyone can be a validator in the network. It has low latencies. Consensus can be reached very quickly, which is why Stellar can process transactions at a much faster rate than a lot of other blockchains. It has flexible trust. Participants are free to decide what nodes they trust, which is something that we'll come back to and talk about in a second. And this network also uses digital signatures and hash families, so it protects the network against bad actors. So let's actually dive into more of the details of the network and talk about this diagram here. So the first concept we need to talk about is the idea of a quorum. And a quorum is a set of nodes needed to reach agreement. So here in this diagram we have two quorums. There's this first quorum, this red circle, and we have this blue circle, the second quorum. And there's also the idea of a quorum slice, which is just a subset of a quorum. So within the quorum we have node 1 and node 2 and node 5 in our first quorum, and then in our second one we have nodes 3, 5, and 4. And a quorum slice is just a subset of a quorum, and in this example each quorum slice is just one node, or it can be two nodes because 1 and 2 are also a subset of quorum 1. And these quorums need to come to agreement. these quorums need to come to agreement about which transactions are valid and which ones are not. And so quorum 1 has to come to agreement and quorum 2 has to come to agreement. But there's also this intersecting node here which connects quorum 1 and quorum 2. So if quorum 1 reaches agreement and quorum 2 reaches agreement, then this node 5 here is the link between quorum 1 and 2, letting the greater network know that quorum 1 and 2 have reached agreement. And this is just a highly simplified example. Remember, you could have another quorum and there's a ton of quorums inside the actual network itself. And in the SCP, when agreement is reached, it's called a slot. A slot is essentially just a block that's going to be added to the network once it's validated. Like every other network or anything else in life, it has limitations. So the creator of SCP actually stated 3 limitations, in which we'll talk about them briefly now. The first limitation is there's no system for minting new coins. And with Stellar Lumens, there's about 50 billion in circulation, and that's all there ever will be. There used to be a 1% increase every year to make the coin inflationary, but that no longer exists. So there's about 50 billion coins in circulation, and that's all there ever will be. The second limitation is it doesn't provide an incentive scheme to encourage good behavior from the nodes. And the third limitation is it does not tell nodes who they can trust. The nodes choose for themselves who they trust. So in this example, nodes 1, 2, and 5 all agree to trust each other, and nodes 3, 5, and 4 also all agree to trust each other, but they make that decision themselves. They're not told that by the network in any way. Even though Stellar doesn't use a proof of stake algorithm, it does have certain elements of proof of stake and built into the network, which is why this can be confusing for some people. So the consensus mechanism Stellar uses is the one we just talked about, the Stellar Consensus Protocol. But similar to proof of stake, Stellar does require that each account have some small amount of Stellar Lumens so that they do have some stake in making sure everyone's a good actor. Now, of course, everyone will never be a good actor. There's always going to be someone trying to do wrong, but the consensus mechanism we just talked about will hopefully weed out those bad transactions and not add them to the blockchain. That's what it intends to do. But just so we're clear, Stellar does require you to have some sort of minimum balance before you can participate in the network. So earlier we talked about how Stellar has very little transaction fees on its network. They're very small fees, and we're going to spend just a couple of seconds talking about how these fees are computed. So every transaction has a certain number of operations in it, usually 1 to 100, and then that number of operations multiplied by the base fee is how your transaction fee is computed. If you're wondering what the base fee is, it's 100 stroops, or 0.00001 stellar lumens per operation. The one thing that's going to make Stellar really take off and achieve wide adoption is developers actually using the Stellar SDK to build applications that use the Stellar network to actually process the transactions via their application. And so they can use the Stellar SDK to do that. And we're on the developers.stellar.org website. So if you're a developer and you want to build on Stellar, then you should go here. They have a lot of good resources here. But this is essentially the basis of what's going to be the adoption mechanism for Stellar. There are the end users who will actually use Stellar to make the transactions, and then there has to be applications that use the Stellar network on the back end to facilitate those transactions. So the adoption of this SDK by developers is going to be a huge key in Stellar actually gaining wider adoption. Another really interesting thing about Stellar is Stellar has a lot of really good partnerships. They have a partnership with IBM, which is an international consulting company. It stands for International Business Machine. They've been around for decades and they're a powerhouse in the tech industry and have been for a very long time. They also have a partnership with Deloitte, which is a audit, tax, and consulting firm. If you're familiar with the Big Four, Deloitte is the largest of the Big Four. They do billions of dollars in revenue everywhere, just like IBM. They also have a really interesting partnership with Stripe, which is a payment platform where developers can incorporate Stripe and use that to enable payments within their applications. So this is another way in which Stellar can gain wider adoption if Stripe allows developers to start using the Stellar network within their applications, then that could be something that makes this a lot easier to adopt and make the Stellar network more popular overall. So Stellar has a lot of really good partnerships, which I think shows you how promising this crypto and this network really is. Now let's talk about the price history of Stellar, and we're going to look at some price predictions also. Now, my disclaimer, this is not an investment channel. I'm not here to give you any financial or investment advice. I'm just going to talk about what the price has done in the past, and then we'll look at some other people's price predictions so you can gauge whether there's a general bullish or bearish sentiment surrounding Stellar Lumens, or its abbreviation, XLM. So you can see from when it went live in 2014, the price was less than a penny, and it was that way for about 3 years, and then it shot up to its all-time high of about 94 cents. And then you can see it went back down and was hanging out around 10 cents, 8 cents again for about 2.5 years. And then in the bull run of 2021, it shot up to its yearly high of about 74 cents before going back down to its current price of about 26 cents. So that's where the price has been. Let's look at where some people think it's going to go. So if you look at Money Morning, they think $6 a coin is possible, and they think that's going to happen by 2025. Now let's look at another one, the Changely blog. Let's scroll down and look at some of their price predictions. Let's look at their price prediction for 2025 also. And they think it's going to be at $1 by 2025. So they still think it's going to be an increase in the price, but definitely they don't think it's going to go as high as Money Morning. So in general, looking at the price predictions, what we do see is generally a bullish sentiment on Stellar Lumens. A lot of people do think its price will increase in the future. Remember, that's not the Payathlon price prediction. I'm just giving you some other price predictions so that you can see if there's general bullish or bearish sentiment surrounding the price of the crypto. Again, this is not an investment or financial advice channel. But the last thing I want to leave you with is some further reading materials, and this is the white paper on Stellar, on the Stellar network, so I would highly recommend you take a look at this. And also, that concludes this video, so please like, comment, and subscribe. Please subscribe to Payathlon. We have a lot of cryptocurrency videos as well as other tech videos coming in the future, so be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. And also visit payathlon.com, and also be sure to like us on Instagram and Twitter. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.